What does it mean to be a good corporate citizen? Prior to Dodd-Frank, I think many people would say to be a good corporate citizen means to have a strong internal compliance program, good whistleblowing protocols, good training, and when appropriate, although you're not required to necessarily, to disclose voluntarily to enforcement authorities and regulators when you see wrongdoing in your midst, and to take remedial action. Dodd-Frank changed that.
The whistleblower provision in particular caused a fair amount of angst within corporate America.
At a core level, the SEC has not changed. What's changed specifically with the whistleblower rule is that it put in place a system where an employee or even a non-employee can provide original information voluntarily to the SEC anonymously, and if there is an enforcement action taken with an aggregate penalty or sanction of more than $1 million, that whistleblower is entitled to a bounty. And so that's a shift in the dynamic in terms of how companies approach these types of issues and really the entire fraud enforcement landscape.
What that means to corporate America is that the dress rehearsal is over. And you need to ensure that all of those structures that you built, specifically related to your company's process for intaking complaints, whistleblower allegations and other things through a hotline or otherwise, and really take a fresh look to make sure that your intake is working effectively, that your triaging of those allegations is appropriate, that you're recognizing the issues for what they are, and that you're following up on them appropriately.
In the world post-Madoff, in which the SEC has come under a lot of public criticism going back a few years in their responsiveness to certain complaints, they're very conscious of the need to focus on these whistleblower complaints. Because of the economic crisis and the enormous downward budget pressures on the SEC and other enforcement agencies, you're seeing a recognition by them like never before. They cannot be the police person for all entities and publicly traded companies. They're relying more, not less, on the ability of companies to police themselves. And that has the consequence of when they find a company not doing that, they will view that very negatively because they have to rely upon that in their arsenal. They've said that time and again over the last 2 years that that is a focus of theirs and an expectation of theirs.
The triaging, I think, again, is critical. And one of the key success factors there is to make sure that the people responsible for the triaging have enough perspective and enough of an understanding of where issues could go.
Centralizing that whistleblowing complaint function so you have one person who can look on behalf of the company, or at least supervise others who do, and say, where need we place those resources, understanding that they're limited, and when do we need to make that tough decision on when to bring in outside counsel and outside forensic auditors to make sure that we're being credible, where perhaps we will be disclosing, or even if we don't disclose on our own to the SEC.
We have a robust process that we
have a robust process in case they knock on our door and show up and say, why didn't you tell us this? And we can show exactly what we did.
It's definitely a different paradigm, and it's definitely worth a refresh. And I think what I found is many companies haven't looked at it, and so now is an excellent time to do that. If only because you'll find yourself explaining it to the SEC if in fact you do have an allegation.
Right. Any time that a problem is raised by an employee at a company, it has to be treated very quickly. You have to perform triage. You should have an action plan on the shelf ready to go, because you should just assume, if you want to be careful, that that employee within 120 days will make a similar complaint to the SEC.